In our last section, I made the bold claim that the grass family is a mafia. Think about it. Out of 462 families of plants, just one family, the thirsty, weedy grass family, Poaceae, Gramineae, depending on which name you use, same family, accounts for over 60% of agriculture and ornamental landscaping. Wheat, rice, corn, sugar, barley, oats, sorghum, bamboo, and lawn grass, but not marijuana, are all members of the grass family, and they dominate the landscape, and they account for most of our water use, our pesticide use, our herbicide use, and for destruction of our forests and our wetlands, and all for growing grasses, one family out of 462. As we've taken pains to point out in previous lectures, they are by and large non-nutritional cash crops and are ecological disaster species, literally. I mean literally. Disaster species, not just in the Donald Trump sense of it's a disaster, but ecologically. As pioneer species, they and other weeds are part of disturbance ecology, thriving wherever there's been a disaster, a flood, a fire, earthquake, landslide, or plague. They take over when there's no stability, and their function in ecosystem is to repair the damage and repair the ground, that is to say, repair the damage and prepare the ground, so that successional species of greater permanence, shrubs and trees and entire forest ecosystems, can take over. Some grasslands thrive where the climate and weather and animal herds maintain a high degree of disturbance. But even there, the role of the types of grasses that humans have become addicted to becomes somewhat limited as perennial deep-rooted grasses take over and allow an interspersion of other plant families to form a shifting but niche-parsing and stable mosaic of biodiversity. We humans have broken the rules. We've shortcutted the process and allowed the annual disturbance regime to rule. This one mafia-like family now sets the rules for all the land, which in service to their needs, we spend all our energy and time plowing, turning, weeding, and watering. Want to know the #1 contributor to the pollution of our lakes, streams, rivers, and oceans? Grass agriculture, grain production, and lawn maintenance. Think of the endless sprinklers. Growing grasses use up the most fresh water and contaminates fresh and salt water alike. It's a disaster. And, let's go back into my own voice, according to the professor who was talking about Middle Eastern conflicts, every loaf of bread shipped out of the so-called Holy Land to another country represents embedded water that's unavailable to vulnerable people in that arid region. If we truly cared about human welfare and sustainable ecology, we would cease growing grass family products in arid regions, and we would do as the Palestinians have done for hundreds of generations. We would rely on agroforestry, on perennial trees and shrubs for both domestic use and agricultural exports. Pomegranates, almonds, olives, dates, all of that. These plants represent a variety of families and ecological niches and use very little water relative to the grasses, particularly since, when grown polyculturally, they develop root systems that maintain moist soils and recharge aquifers and create canopies that create microclimates that encourage the formation of rain clouds. We could rightly say that it was the shift to large-scale grain agriculture and the transformation of fields and forests into grazing grasslands that caused the desertification now causing such conflicts and misery. The way back to the Garden of Eden could be as simple as a defeat of the grass family mafia. In my own life, as a Nexus thinker, I try to avoid grasses wherever possible, just to give a chance to the other families of plants. I use buckwheat in the family Polygonaceae, which bees love, rather than wheat, which is a grass in the Poaceae. And I make cauliflower rice. Cauliflower is in the Brassicaceae, the mustard family, rather than oryza, which is in the Poaceae. And almond meal, prunus, in the Rosaceae, rather than cornmeal, Zea maize, in Poaceae. And for lawns, I prefer edible sedges like Cyperus esculentus in the Cyperaceae, sometimes called earth almond or chufa, that has tuberous roots that can be eaten. See, there are so many substitutes that can conserve water and keep it from being polluted, all while providing much more nutritious food. But does that mean that grasses are to be completely shunned by the Nexus thinker? No. A Nexus thinker sees the utility of all parts of a system. Once the mafia-like power of the grass family has been wrested away from the Poaceae, they have definite uses. In India, for example, when I was with the India Youth Climate Network documenting environmental solutions in 2009, on the trip where I discovered urban home biogas, we heard a different story. The American producer of the tour got us an invitation to visit a pharmaceutical company that's famous for its environmental green credentials. But the grounds of the pharmaceutical company were surrounded by a huge lawn that was constantly being maintained. Lots and lots of water. The producer got irked and said, "How can you call yourself green and yet have such a huge lawn?" The CEO replied, "Madam, the lawn is beautiful, but you are right, that would not justify its presence. But you should know that here we don't use any pesticides or herbicides, and that our lawns are cut by solar-powered electric mowers. They are irrigated with recycled wastewater, so they help us recharge the aquifer by helping to filter the water. But more than that, we use the grass to power much of our pharmaceutical labs and processes. The grass is the raw material for our pyrolysis gasification process that generates heat to boil water, creates steam and electricity, and sterilize equipment. So we're literally growing our own fuel. A full life cycle analysis would reveal whether the inputs for growing the grass to make the fuel for the industry had a positive benefit-cost ratio relative to what it takes to create and transport fossil fuels. But since the energy is coming from the sun and the water is reclaimed wastewater, it's hard to see the downside. In California, during one of the emergency droughts, I worked on converting a foreclosure house into an eco demonstration home, and we faced the decision of whether to convert the lawn to a xeriscape garden filled with rocks and cacti and low water plants. But the owner of the property wanted a place for his kids to play ball that could take the disturbance. Grasses are good at that. So what did we do? Because of a brave group of eco-warriors called the Gray Water Guerrillas, California had passed laws allowing homeowners to irrigate using the dirty water coming from their showers and sinks and dishwashers and clothes washers. This so-called gray water actually has nutritional value due to the fats and the oils and phosphorus in detergents and soaps. So used properly, it can be used to maintain a lush green lawn even during the most severe droughts because of the sheer amount of water the average modern home discharges every day, normally lost to the sewer system and usually causing problems. So here we were using Nexus thinking to solve these problems, and nobody could complain that we were wasting water by embedding it in a lawn or letting it transpire to the dry atmosphere, because it was wastewater. Nexus thinking compels us to think things through on a case-by-case basis and ask, are the trade-offs worth it? Often the problems are issues of scale and the market forces, particularly speculation in commodities markets, that drive growers to try to maximize profits and yields by using unsustainable practices. One of the cases in embedded water that also affects my lifestyle choices because of the sheer amount of water used, wasted, and contaminated is cotton growing. Yes, the fashion industry and our consumer addiction to fitting in and looking good, as defined by consumer culture, is responsible for turning a plant in the mallow family, Gossypium in the Malvaceae, into one of the planet's worst environmental offenders. As is pointed out by the World Wildlife Fund in the Impact of a Cotton T-Shirt, How Smart Choices Can Make a Difference in Our Water and Energy Footprint, which you can find at worldwildlife.org/stories/the impact of a cotton T-shirt, quote, your favorite T-shirt is made from more than cotton and memories. One key ingredient that doesn't show up on your shirt's label is water. Amazingly, it can take 2,700 liters to produce the cotton needed to make a single T-shirt. This is the unseen or virtual water we consume every day. So while it's important to fix leaky taps and buy efficient washing machines, the water we use at home is only part of our total water footprint, end quote. The article states that, quote, 70% of all the water people use globally is dedicated to agriculture. And they cite in particular thirsty crops like sugar and rice and say water is essential for the food we eat as well as crops like cotton. It also talks about the amount of virtual water embedded in our obsession with overwashing our clothes. 40 gallons per wash on average, and encourages us to take steps to reduce our water footprint by being aware of embedded water everywhere, saying, take a refreshing cola or cold beer, only a fraction of the water involved actually goes into the bottle. Most of it is used to grow the sugarcane or barley these drinks are made from. The article goes on saying, your smartphone may not make you think of water, but from mining essential minerals to washing microchips, that little gadget has a substantial global water footprint. The amount of fresh water available to meet the needs of people and nature is limited, but the demands grow year by year. We have to get smarter about how we use water, end quote. The World Wildlife Fund also tells us that it, quote, works with farmers and businesses that buy their crops to develop sustainable farming methods. This takes the strain off water supplies. From farmers in Pakistan and India to CEOs in the United States and South Africa, we're helping people to use water more responsibly. With WWF support, the Better Cotton Initiative is working with farmers to grow cotton with less water. In Pakistan, the initiative has worked with 75,000 farmers who, as a result, have reduced their water use by 39% and increased their income by 11%. They also used 47% less pesticide and 37% less chemical fertilizer. That's good for them, good for other communities downstream, good for the fish, birds, and other creatures that depend on rivers and wetlands, and good for people like you who care about where your t-shirts come from, end quote. Now, what is not considered in these better practices initiatives is that we don't have to use cotton at all. Once again, we're dealing with a mafia of certain plants and practices when there's so many alternatives, when there's so much biodiversity to cooperate with that could more drastically reduce or even eliminate pesticides and herbicides and obviate excess water use. Here's some of them. Hemp, in particular, is well known to be a superior alternative, but it suffers from severe political barriers. My family and I have bought and worn hemp jeans and hemp shirts. We've also gotten great clothing made from blends of bamboo, hemp, linen, or flax, silk, which uses fibers from the silkworm fed on sustainable mulberry tree leaves, a form of agroforestry, which is very helpful, and others. All of these use and contaminate far less water. And just as we learn to see embedded water and resultant contamination in plant agriculture, we can learn to see it in animal agriculture. A popular environmentalist meme is to say, you shouldn't eat beef. It takes 660 gallons of water to make one hamburger. Eat veggie burgers made from soy that only use 216 gallons. But is this really the right comparison? What if the cows in question were grazing in a complex grassland ecology without irrigation? What if the water used for creating dry feed for cattle was reclaimed water used to grow Maya breadnut trees, like a friend of mine does in the Yucatan in Mexico? And then what if the cows were fed on breadnut tree leaves? Would that be a bad thing? And what about the fact that soy, though less water intensive, is now the cause of permanent deforestation? Paradoxically, because it's a nitrogen-fixing plant. While forests cut for pasture tend to be left to grow back into forest after a few years precisely because cattle grazing is unsustainable. At what point and due to which practices does sustainability become a bad thing? Do we really want to create practices for grain and cotton agriculture that are locally sustainable if it encourages the loss of biodiversity on a regional scale? It goes back to the claim of those Bedouins in Syria who made me reconsider my vegan lifestyle. Maybe instead of finding ways to grow corn and cotton with less water and pesticides, we shouldn't be growing these crops at all, but should allow certain animals to graze on plants we consider weeds and have been wasting money and time and poisoning the land trying to eliminate. It's very complex and requires a lot of deep Nexus thinking. And once you know what the water footprint of things is and how much water consumption your everyday consumer behavior is causing, you need to have solutions. Solutions that consider the sustainability of the entire ecosystem, not just a particular industry or practice. Fortunately, there are many. So in conclusion, once we begin to see embedded water or virtual water in everything we use, and when we use Nexus systems thinking to evaluate the pros and the cons through a full life cycle analysis, and with both micro and macro views and multiple time-space scales, and couple that way of seeing the world with a realization that we have many, many, many alternatives, alternative plant and animal species, alternative energy sources, alternative farming and industrial practices, we can be better able to choose paths that lead to better outcomes. As long as we remain ignorant of our options, we allow a mafia of plant families, plant genera, and plant species, a mafia of animal species, and a mafia of unsustainable practices to dominate our lives. We can do better. The first step is to learn to see where the water is, where it's going, and how it's being used, and then to see the options. Then we can decide.